Hi, everybody. Good evening. I am Mary Ann Antonelis. I'm the director of the Superior Library here in Shutesbury. Thank you very much. So thank you so much for coming out tonight. I really appreciate having everybody here. This meeting is really about Andrea Bunker and Lauren Starra and the Board of Library Commissioners and their small library pilot project. I do just have a couple of announcements to make that are related to this before I hand it over to them. One is that if you haven't been to the event before, there are bathrooms inside. So, just inside the door and then to the left. And then the Friends of the Library are having a fundraiser for the new library fund. They're doing a clothing and accessories drive. And they're going to start collecting stuff the first weekend in September and collecting all the way through the month of September. And there'll be lots more information coming out about that. And then we're going to talk tonight about the small library pilot project. And we're going to keep talking about the small library pilot project and Shutesbury's need for a new library. And we're going to have some mediated conversations so that we can include everybody in the conversation, even people who might, be uncomfortable coming out and just participating in something as large as this, or something that might seem less personal. So if you're interested in participating in mediating conversations, there's a sign-up sheet in the back, kind of near where Renee is. There's a table back there. And John, can you wave your hand because you're right next to the sign-up sheet? Okay. And there are some pens there, so if you just put down your name and your email address, we can contact you directly. Okay? So with that, I'm going to hand it over to these guys.
Thank you, Mary Ann. I am going to take my mask off so you can see my mouth moving. I find that when people are talking with a mask on, I find myself staring at their mask and trying to figure out what they're saying. My name is Lauren Starra. I am a library building specialist with the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. Some of you may remember me from the last construction grant round at Shutesbury. Valiantly attempted to pass a grant in. And I am joined by Andrea Bunker. She will introduce herself in a moment. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. This is a very bizarre time to be doing anything as a group. We're trying to work on a project that is new and unfamiliar. And I want to applaud all of you who are willing to make the effort to come out. We have two purposes for this meeting tonight. One is Andrea and I are going to give you some information about the small library pilot project. And I want to emphasize that this is not the same as the grant rounds that Shutesbury has participated in the past. This is a one-time deal. It likely, hopefully, if it's successful, will morph in some form into a grant project type for future grant rounds. But this is a pilot project. We've never done anything like this before. Excuse me. And so it's a little bit of figuring it out as we go along. And I wish I could give you all the steps down the road from now to a new library in Shutesbury. But as I said, we're going to figure this out together. So that's the first purpose for the meeting. The second purpose for tonight's meeting is to start gathering input and ideas from all of you about what kind of library the town of Shutesbury needs and wants. You've gone through this exercise before, but library services have changed a lot in the last, how long has it been, 9 years? So things are moving rapidly. There are a lot of building-related concerns that have come up in the last year and a half that were never on anybody's radar. So all of those things will factor into the library that Shutesbury wants and needs. Next slide, please. So we have known for a long time at the MBLC that it's difficult for very small towns to participate in our grant program. It's tough for a town like Shutesbury to find the resources and capacity to take advantage of the grants. This is a map of our construction grant program participation from 1989 to 2020. And you can see the blank areas. And we've been working at least as long as I've been with the board, which is 8.5 years now. We've been working hard to try to come up with a way to make it possible for very small towns to participate. And this is the first. We've floated a lot of ideas. We've fleshed them out, gone partway down the road, and it kind of, that's not going to work. So this is the first time that we've gotten this far with anything like this, and we're very excited about it. Next. As I said, over the last 8+ years, we've done a lot of research. One of the first things I did when I first came to the board was I started investigating standards for library design and construction across the nation, and actually across North America, because I lived in Canada also. And there isn't really anything up to date. So between the summer of 2019 and last November 2020, beginning with Rosemary Waltos, if any of you remember her, and I, and Andrea, and a design firm called Sasaki, we developed this design guide for libraries. It's called Library Space, a Planning Resource for Librarians. And in it, we talk about best practices for library design. And when I say best practices, I want to be clear about that, because we do not tell you, if you're a town of 1,832, you need a library of X square feet. That's not the kind of metric that exists. It's not a valid way to go about designing a library, because every community is different. Every community needs different kinds of services and different kinds of spaces in their library. And that's what the library building program is all about. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. So we spent a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on this guide. And one of the things that we want to do with this pilot project is to use this as the guidebook and to prove, it's like a proof of concept for this work that we've done so far. So this is going to be the basis for the design. Okay, next. We think this guide will help libraries in towns that don't have a lot of resources and expertise to at least understand what's involved in designing a library project. So this is kind of the foundation. It has a lot of information in it. We've given Marianne, how many copies did we give you?
About 10.
10. We have 3 more here that we're going to leave also. But it is also freely available on our website as a PDF that you can download, and all of that is available if you contact Marianne or contact me. That will be there for you. Next. So I want to talk about the pilot project goals. So the first goal is to test some new ideas for our grant round. One of the things that we've learned through the last grant round that we ran, which was in 2016 and 2017, is that the way we are doing things isn't working anymore. Because we ended up with a 15-year waiting list. Okay, that doesn't work for anybody. And we started out with 33 projects. We funded 9. We had 24 on the waiting list. That was in 2017. Now we're down to 14 on the waiting list. So we are working our way through it, but the problem is that cost escalation is making it harder and harder for projects to approve the funding to actually construct the building when their estimate and their grant amount was set in 2017. So we know that that's not going to work anymore. And our funders from the Department of Administration and Finance have told us you can't do that anymore also. We're thinking about a lot of ways to change our grant program, and we want to test a few of those ways in this pilot project. So Andrea is going to talk about some focus groups that we did in January of 2021.
So actually, can everyone hear me? Through my mask? Okay, great. Hi, I'm Andrea. Thank you for coming out tonight for this. When we decided to look at our program and how to restructure it and restructure the application process and the entire process, we started off with surveys that went out to libraries that had participated in our process. And from there, we contacted people who said that they would be interested in participating in focus groups. So this was pre-pandemic. We went all around the state to every region, and we met with library directors whose projects had succeeded and whose projects had failed at town meeting or in their city council votes. So what we learned is that having 2 separate grant rounds for essentially one construction grant round is difficult. So we would start off with a planning and design grant, and that would run for 2 years, and then a year later we would have a construction grant round. That's a lot of time in between. There's escalation costs there. It goes up at least 5% every year due to labor costs, at least. Materials are a little bit more unpredictable, as we've all seen throughout the pandemic. So we wanted a way to streamline it. So what we're thinking about doing is combining those grant rounds and bringing a community through the entire process seamlessly so that we're able to mitigate any raised costs due to escalation. So this pilot project will test that out because we're going to be moving through planning and design and construction with the community that is chosen and that votes to move forward. So that's one way that we are changing things. Our next grant round, in the regular grant round, will be much more competitive. We will not have a wait list that is as long as it is now. So what we're hoping to do is to get to a predictable grant cycle. Something that's easier for communities to gauge when they could apply next time, rather than it be kind of this vague idea of maybe 5-7 years when you can apply again. So we're hoping to make it more regular. So those are some of the things that we are testing out with this. So it's a little bit different in terms of when approvals and how approvals will be met moving forward, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Lauren, was there anything else to mention about that?
I think that covers what we're looking at for our regular grant program, but I want to talk a little bit more about the differences between our regular grants and this pilot project. We are going to use it as a test bed for that dual purpose, but the difference, one of the differences with the pilot project is that we're going to work much more closely with the town. We're going to be involved in the process. We are going to be, Andrea and I will be members of the design team. And I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But one thing I want to mention now is that this process for the pilot project is going to be heavily documented via video, minutes, records, recordings, whatever way we can find to document the way both the planning process and the construction process goes. And we see that as a way to help other towns understand the process when they're looking at jumping into this pool. Number 2, goal 2, and as I mentioned, we want to work collaboratively and closely with the town. This is an interesting process because, as I said earlier, we don't know exactly how this is going to go. It may fall apart. We are committed to doing a pilot project if we can make it work. But if we can't find a town that the money, it's always the money, right? And the money is going to be a big issue in this, and we'll talk a lot more about that later. But the point is, we want this to be a collaboration between the state and the municipality. We are going to be working together to make this happen. Next. And this is the end game, to build a new public library in a town of less than 2,000 people. And the goals that we have are that we want this building to be functional, efficient, flexible, durable, and extremely economical. We want this to be a model for other towns around the state and even around the country to look at and say, that's how we should do it. So now getting into the nitty-gritty. The state is willing to step up to the tune of 75% of eligible costs for the project. And I want you to know that if we could give you 100%, we would. But 75% of eligible cost is the maximum that we are allowed by statute to give to a municipality for a library building. Andrea and I will be on the design team, and we will be working closely with the chosen town throughout the process. And the important thing for you to know is that we're going to be on the design team. But to be honest, we don't care what the building looks like. We are not going to tell you it's going to be, a spaceship floating above the lot, or it's going to be, cedar shingles, or it's going to be brick, or it's going to be whatever. The aesthetics of the project are up to you. And I want you to understand that. We do not have any opinion about aesthetics, and will not have any input on decisions that affect the way the building looks, unless they have an impact on durability, cost, efficiency, those things that I mentioned earlier. And the other thing that I want you to want to mention is that let's say you as a community say, everybody walks to the library. We don't need a parking lot. We're going to have something to say about that. We don't need a meeting room. We'll have something to say about that. So we're not going to tell you what needs to go into your building, but if there's something that we think, Andrea and I are experts on library design, and if there's something that we think a public library today needs, and you say we don't need that, we're going to have a conversation. It doesn't mean you can't argue us out of it. As I said, we want this to be a collaboration. We also want this project to happen fairly quickly, because we know that every year and every month that goes by, costs are just going up. It doesn't matter what the economy is doing, construction costs always rise. So we want this to get going. And we'll talk more about the timeline later. So this is going to be the most interesting part of the project. And that is that we, as the state, are going to ask you, the pilot town, to commit to a financial commitment before we have a design. That is not going to be easy, and we understand that. But we have to understand, we have to feel comfortable that the town is financially committed before we say, okay, we're going to start the design process. So we'll talk, we're going to do some estimating based on the square footage arrived at through the library building program process. We're going to build in a couple of years of escalation, and we're going to build in a contingency. We've had a lot of discussions about having a not to exceed number involved in that town meeting warrant when we ask you to approve the money. And that's something that is certainly possible. But what I want you to know is this is a crucial difference between our regular grant program and this pilot project. And that is that if we commit to a project and it turns out to cost more than the estimate, we are still going to cover 75% of the eligible costs. So our grant is not limited to what we set when we award the grant. It can grow if it needs to. So the timeline. The town of Shutesbury has already submitted a letter of intent, which is why we're here. We received 4 letters of intent, and one of those towns has already withdrawn. So we're now working with 3 towns to get to this point. December 3rd is when the official application needs to go in, and we are just dotting the I's and crossing the T's on that application form, and we'll have it to you in another week or so. So that's December. The month of December and January of next year, Andrea and I are going to be 2 of a 6-member application review team. We're going to review the applications. We are going to look at things like the site that the town has chosen. We're going to look at the financial capacity of the town. We're going to look at how much support we see behind the project in the town. And we're also going to look at things like the not just the condition, but the facility that you're working with now and the inadequacies in that facility, and also the track record of the town in taking care of both the library and other town-related buildings. We're also going to look at the need factor that we use in our traditional grant program, which is calculated by municipality using why am I blanking on this? It's income per capita and EQV, which is equalized valuation. So it's property values in town and per capita income in a town. And we've already calculated those. We know what it is. I talked about that already. So, after we get done with that review and our team of 6 gets together and deliberates, and by the way, the team will be made up of Andrea and myself, an architect who has worked with us for many years, 2 librarians who have either been through our program or been through other construction projects, and another MBLC staff member who is a grant specialist. So that's who's going to evaluate the 3 applications. If we get 3, we may not. We may get none. We don't know. And we're going to decide on a pilot town in late February or early March of next year. And that's just in time for a spring town meeting, and that's when we're going to ask you to commit to the money. Yeah, of course.
So one of the other criteria too that will be is the financial health of the community, so the bonding capacity. I don't know if that was mentioned, so kind of sort of. So bonding capacity and ability, it can be fundraising. There are many things that can go into how this project will be financed, like the valuation of land can count toward it. So all sorts of things that we can get into, but that will also be one of the criteria. And then I also just wanted to mention, and this is different than our regular grant program, but what we found through our focus groups too, is that what was submitted with the application, the schematic design submitted with the application, 50% of them were thrown out and they started over again with another architect and did another design. So this was after their towns already approved their financial commitment, authorized the money, and decided to move forward on construction. 50% of them change architects and change designs for whatever reason it may be. So it's actually not that rare to be voting on an appropriation without having the schematic design that you're going to be moving forward with. So I just wanted to point that out because it can sound scary, but through the building program process, you're getting all of the community input, you're seeing what the community needs and wants, and you're seeing the square footage that would accommodate those and what the town needs. So through that square footage is where you can come up with that figure. So I just wanted to mention that before we move forward.
And the reason that we're not giving you a cost per square foot today is because we want to wait until the last minute and come up with the most current construction costs per square foot for libraries as we can. So what we'll do is we'll go through the library building process with Mary Ann and with whoever wants to participate. As she said, there's a sign-up sheet that's already started. And from that, we will glean what spaces and services you need. We will figure out how big the spaces need to be based on the projected attendance or use of the space. And then we will add all those together. You've got to add 30%, believe it or not, for things like hallways, bathrooms, mechanical, all that stuff. And that is where we get our gross square footage number. And then we will multiply that by the best per square foot figure that we can find. And then we're going to add a contingency because you never know. And we don't want to get stuck where we have an approval for an amount of money and it turns out not to be enough. So we are going to ask you to approve more than we think you might need. But we're not going to say if you approve an amount you have to spend it. We're going to try to keep this as tight as we possibly can. And I keep emphasizing that we want this to be a collaboration. We want to work with you to make this happen. Okay. And that is really I stopped in the middle. So that's the approval of finances. We anticipate next July, which is the beginning of the next fiscal year for us, we will then have chosen the town, approved the money, and we're ready to start. So at that point, we will start the bidding process for an owner's project manager, and then for an architect, we will jump both feet into the design process. And we think but somewhere between 8 months and a year later is when we'll get the first shovel in the ground. So it's fast, and we know it's fast. And if it's too ambitious, like I said, we're figuring this out as we go along, and if it takes longer, it takes longer, but it will cost more if it takes longer. So, questions? This is the end of the first topic for tonight, and I really want to hear what you have to say about it. I want to hear what questions you have, and if I can't answer, I'm going to say, I don't know, we have to figure that out.
So the thing I didn't say is that there's a microphone here. If any of you, if you have a nice loud voice, you can call out your question, but if you want to come up to the mic, you can. Okay. Yes?
So much of this seems to be presented on the amount of the initial cost. And I'm thinking particularly about geothermal, solar. These have much larger initial costs for installation than normal fossil fuel fed heating systems, for instance. If we have geothermal, it would be economically much more efficient over the long haul, even though it has a higher initial cost. Does that get played into the assessment of the cost of the project as proposed?
So did everyone hear the question? So just for the video recording in the back, it's about the upfront costs of doing sustainability and energy efficiency measures that will have a better life cycle cost in the long run, right? So solar, geothermal. We've been talking a lot with our colleagues at the state level in the Department of Energy Resources about this topic. There recently was the Climate Act, which is it's a much longer name than that. That was signed into law by the governor this past spring. We also have Executive Order 594, which was signed by the governor, and that was an update to the 2008 Executive Order that covered energy efficiency for state-owned assets. But what they're asking for is for any state-run program to honor the spirit of that executive order and comply to the best possible, level with that executive order. So we are very much looking at energy efficiency and looking at solar and geothermal. We will be looking at the life cycle costs throughout, so there will be that, different configurations for solar, geothermal, whatever it may be, whatever type of heating, cooling system you have. Looking at the life cycle costs over time, because there may be a higher upfront cost, but more cost savings realized for the town throughout the life cycle of that equipment. So that is something that will be looked at. However, when we were mentioning that financial piece earlier, you can also have other grants go toward your financial commitment. So you can work with your utilities. I believe that you are a green community, correct? So if you're a green community, you should have an officer in town, or you have a regional coordinator too through green communities that you can be talking with and finding out where the best incentives are and what grant opportunities there are through the Green Communities Act. So or program. So there are other opportunities to try to cover some of those costs. And we'll definitely be working on that with the municipality that's chosen. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I want to just say a little more about that. If you have not seen the document that's called the program notice, it is also on our website, and Mary Ann is intimately familiar with it. It's kind of the announcement of the pilot project. We included in that some planning and design guidelines where we talk about the library space document. But we also say environmental sustainability and resilience will be part of the planning process, including the building's energy and carbon use and the potential for the library to serve as a heating, cooling, powering center in the event of an emergency. The library will be built using sustainable practices and clean energy sources. in compliance with Executive Order Number 594, leading by example, decarbonizing and minimizing environmental impacts of state government. So it's definitely something that we're thinking a lot about. Exactly which technology is appropriate for the project, that is going to have to be worked out. And I will also mention something that Marianne has asked me numerous times, and that is that in the past we have not considered solar panels to be an eligible cost under our grant program for this pilot project, and likely going forward. We will be counting solar panels as an eligible cost if they are mounted on the building. If they're mounted on a land array, that's a little different. That's trickier for us to cover because we don't cover anything on the ground, basically. But solar panels on the roof will be eligible. Thank you. Any other? Yes?
Just following up on that, a lot of state grant programs, you get extra points for different things. And so I don't know if you thought about it, but in the last year, Shutesbury got a municipal vulnerability preparedness grant, and we're also a smart streets town. So in terms of trying to advance, climate-related things and sustainability, if it's possible to sort of get points for that in your process, given that it's competitive. So I don't know if you thought about it.
I think looking at the maintenance of buildings and also what the municipality has done progressing forward, I think that definitely does come into play. We do have an evaluation sheet for the team that will be evaluating that has points per specific, key target areas for the application, so that will probably be considered under that.
Thank you.
One of you, let's do the one in front first. Yes.
Ma'am? The financial commitment
Yes.
you require from the town,
Yes.
is that purely for the structure?
The financial commitment equals 25% of the estimated eligible costs plus 100% of the ineligible costs. So ineligible costs include things like paving, landscaping, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Those are things that our grant cannot cover. Well, that's a good, thank you. That's a very good point. One of the things that is different from our regular grant program in the pilot project is that we are expecting the town to provide a clean site. We are not going to cover any hazardous materials cleanup or demolition on the piece of land that is chosen. That will be the town's responsibility. But actually, thank you, because I wanted to go back. I forgot to say that, so there's 25% of eligible costs and 100% of ineligible costs that the town is on the hook for. But we don't care where that money comes from. Any legal source of money is fine. Grants, other state grants, federal grants, private grants, fundraising. You got a zillionaire in the hollows of Shutesbury who wants to give you all the money, that's fine. We don't care where it comes from, as long as you come up with it.
So,
Yeah?
to follow up.
Yeah.
So, your commission will require the town taxpayers to know what this library is going to cost beyond what you just mentioned, besides the structure and the ineligible costs, like contents, equipment, computers, books, videos, etc. Because before the town can commit to that, right, we need to know what it's going to cost.
Right.
So you'll make sure that that's something you're going to require, that the town know what.
We're going to have professional estimators who help us come up with that number. Now, here's the thing. While we would prefer that you open the building with good quality commercial grade furniture. If you want to bring the old tables and chairs from the old library and put them in there, you know, that's your decision. You want to have people donate their old tables and chairs to the library, that's your decision. We hope that doesn't happen, but we understand that at the end of a project, it's usually the furniture that gets cut. You know, there's always value engineering in a project, which is one of the phrases I hate the most.
But there are also state contracts. So there's state contract, there's the Massachusetts Higher Education Consortium contract as well. They negotiate the best prices for some so there are some furniture dealers that deal with libraries that are on those contracts. So that figure won't be kind of out there and just guessing. You can look at the state contracts and see what they're charging for different pieces of furniture too. So, and the program, the building program, tells you how many seats you want in a room, how many tables you need in a room. So you're dealing with
What equipment you need.
real, true numbers and then figures.
So the lady in the purple lavender.
I wonder if you'd just go over this, the timeline and sort of point out when we get to vote. We know we need to go to town meeting and vote on the cost.
Right. That is next spring of 2022.
Who gets to choose the designer team?
That's the town. I mean, we'll be on the team that helps that, but the contracts, all of the contracts, with the owner's project manager, with the architect, and with the general contractor, are with the town of Shutesbury.
So the town itself will contract with the designer
Yes.
through the committee.
Yes.
There'll be a committee
Yes.
before. Who gets to vote on the final design?
Oh, well, as I said, we're figuring this out as we go along. I think that is something that the town of Shutesbury is going to have to figure out, is how that approval process is going to work once we get into it. And we will advise you on that, but we don't know those
So the
specific.
state doesn't have a requirement on that.
Once you approve the money, we're good. There was one over here somewhere.
Is the cost of the well and the septic an eligible cost?
Yes.
Repeat that, please.
The cost of the well and the septic is an eligible cost. So basically, anything under the ground is eligible. Anything on top of the ground is not eligible.
Except for hazardous materials under the ground.
Yes, back in the back.
It's been a really long time since Shutesbury had a library that you could go into, and I just the other day realized we don't have a reference section. We don't have a lot of things. But in your experience, what is one, I wish we had comment that you have heard from people that have completed their projects? Because it's hard for us to project everything that's not there.
I think I'll let Andrea answer this after I do, because we may differ, but without exception, in the last 5 years, when a new library opens, the first thing the librarian says is, I wish we had more small study rooms. I wish we had more program space. It's because libraries today are not about collections, they are about people and people doing things in the library. So one of the differences from when, I don't think I'm the oldest person in the room, and when I was a kid, libraries were quiet. We got yelled at if we made noise in the library. That is no longer the case. Now you have to have a special room where you have to be quiet because the rest of the library is a vibrant, active space, but there is still a need for quiet space. So that's something that is really important.
And when we say program space, because I agree with both of those, that is what I hear when we built the library that I was in charge of. That was also what we wish we had more of, were the study rooms. But when we say program space, That can be a community meeting programming space, a large space like that. It can be a children's story time and craft room. It can be an innovation lab. It can be, so we have some libraries that are putting in nutrition labs, which are essentially kitchens, especially in areas that are food deserts, so that they can have that sort of teaching module available. So that programming space can be one room that does all of those things, or it can be a dedicated space for each one. So, but definitely, they always wish their meeting room was larger, and they wish they had more study spaces.
One library that is not too far away from here that we are actually going to do a tour of with some Shutesbury people is the Irving Public Library. They are a town of less than 2,000 people. They opened a new library about a year ago, I believe. They have a large meeting room, and they also have a small, they don't call it a maker space. I can't remember what they call it, but it's a kind of a craft activity, tinkering space. I can't remember, do they have small study rooms in Irving?
Oh gosh.
I don't think they do.
There are some libraries that do one large quiet study room
Yeah.
that allows for that same sort of.
Sorry, no, they have two, they have a historical room and a group study room. So they do have two rooms with doors that you can close and be quiet in.
And there's one more thing that I will add to that, because this is a recent thing, is that they wish they had HVAC systems that could handle MERV 13 filters or higher because of the pandemic. So a lot of our projects that started construction during the pandemic were unable to change their HVAC systems because they had already contracted and with those mechanicals, and so it was really difficult for them. So thinking about pandemic design now, I think the HVAC systems, having the best filtration you can have, the best outside air ventilation that you can have is extremely important. And I also think, like we're here tonight, outdoor structures that allow you to meet outdoors under a permanent shelter of some sort that allow that community engagement, because I think what we learned during the pandemic is that we do need each other, but we also need to stay apart and have healthy, clean air so that we can stay safe. So those are two other things I would mention.
And the other thing that I am taking out of the pandemic is that we have to stop skimping on storage space, because when you pull 3/4 of the furniture out of a space because you have to stay apart, where do you put it? Mm-hmm. And with whenever, oh, we forgot about this mechanical thing, or we forgot about this function, the storage is the first thing that goes. And I am going to hold a hard line about storage. The gentleman here, and then in the back.
Do I assume that we're talking about a standalone building as a new library?
That is correct. For the pilot project, we are not going to allow shared buildings, for the same reason that we didn't allow renovation of existing buildings.
And in the siting process, before the project gets to you, do you look at any kind of an alternatives analysis conducted by the community in terms of what's the best site?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And adjacency. I'm not talking about adjacency. So siting a building, way far away from everything else is going to score lower than siting a building adjacent to either other town functions or other like retail places where people go. No retail in Shutesbury.
The transfer station.
Let's put it here next to the AC. But having it in a place where it is convenient to go to more than one place at one time, it makes a lot of sense.
So you would want to see that the town has thought through that process?
Definitely.
Documented?
Definitely.
Clearly.
Yeah. And yes.
So Mary Ann runs fabulous programs, as you probably know. Exercise, kayaks, all kinds of things. And thinking about those kinds of spaces and having taught in that kind of space, large room space, I understand that you probably would allow for the design, the architect would allow for a design to be able to close off some of that.
Yes.
However, the pandemic has allowed us to think even more broadly about that. And one of those is movable protection spaces or movable quiet spaces. And I know, for example, Northeastern did some hearing impaired padding so that they could use spaces that were portable. So how do you look at portable spaces? Do you look at it as furniture, or do you look at it as part of the design of the building?
You know, that's something that we're going to have to work together on, and we'll evaluate each of those items on a case-by-case basis to decide whether it's eligible or not. For example, we are allowing, even though technically we don't consider furniture, excuse me, furniture an eligible cost, we're also encouraging people not to buy big built-in service desks anymore. So we say if you buy a desk that's a service desk, that's an eligible cost. If you want to buy mobile shelving, even though that's not traditional steel shelving, that's an eligible cost. So our view of things is evolving with the need for more flexibility. And I think that we would consider those things that you're talking about. I'm not going to say yes to a blanket yes to everything, but you know, we'll work together on it. Yes, in the middle.
So when the town goes to town meeting to vote on the finances, are we voting only on the cost that is the 25% above the cost that you will be giving us? Or are we including in that all of the furniture and things that are ineligible? Or can that be a separate vote when the building is completed?
We're going to ask you to estimate that cost and include it in what you approve up front.
In our regular grant program, we do ask the municipalities to authorize bonding or authorize the payment of the full eligible cost amount, but we encourage the full total project cost. So construction cost is different than total project cost. And I think that can be confusing sometimes. So total project cost includes all of those elements that are in the ineligible portion of our grant program. But also you have the contingency, so it will be a little bit above and beyond what that 25% of eligible and then 100% of ineligible. So you'll have the contingency part there as well.
Building costs get really confusing because there's eligible costs, there's ineligible costs, there's construction costs, there's total project costs, and you have to be very careful about which of those categories you're talking about. It's always safest to talk about total project costs because then there aren't any surprises when you get at the end. I know of many, many municipalities that bring their construction costs to their communities for initial approval, and then when they get the actual estimate for total project cost, there's sticker shock, and they just say, no way, this is way more than we agreed to before. So I think we have to be very conservative and look at the whole thing.
I do have to say that our recent projects that have just gone through the bidding process are coming in right at or just right below estimated cost.
From 2017, may I say, which is, it blows my mind.
Yes,
I should remember this, but I don't. So either you can answer this or maybe someone else knows, but when we did it last time, you had two votes. I mean, not the multiples, but the first one passed and the second one failed. And so with this change process where it's the two phases grouped together, are we going to confront two votes again? Or
Well, you already did the first vote
or
at the last town meeting.
saying that we could apply?
Saying that we
and
could
if that's
apply,
how we would do it. So
yes,
the first vote. So
that's
the
right.
second one is coming. Okay.
That's right. Yes.
Just a quick question about that 100% of ineligible expenses. And on top of the 25% that we're committing ourselves to. Do you have a sense of, in other library projects, how successful towns were at fundraising for, especially grant fundraising for some of those ineligible expenses, and sort of what their track record was, so we have sort of a ballpark of what we have to dig into?
Okay, I'm not clear what you're asking. Are you talking about the success of fundraising campaigns, or are you talking about?
I want to know, have a sense of, have other towns been successful in their grant writing to cover some of those costs?
In the final reports that we get from our libraries, we do ask them to detail how much money has come in from grants, how much money has come in from fundraising, so we do have some of those figures. Whether or not we have like this year figures will be, but we do have kind of historical. We do have some of that information that we can pull from those final reports. So that is something that we could.
I'd just be curious.
But I will say, in terms of other grants specifically, there are very few.
Right.
Most of our projects have been funded by either tax dollars, free cash, or capital campaigns, or trust funds. Those are the major categories. But, you know, I think the fact that there is so much interest in decarbonization and those kinds of efforts, there's going to be state money and private money available for those kinds of things. So I think we'll start to see some of those crop up in our projects.
And working with the utilities too. The utilities are definitely, you know, helping out in that area.
Thank you.
Okay, we ready to move on to step 2 of the meeting? All right. So this is where we shut up and you start talking. Because we want to hear what it is, first of all, that you cannot do in your library now. I mean, we know a lot of those things, but we want to hear it again. We want to record it for this process. We want to know what kinds of things you see in other libraries that you wish you could do here in Shutesbury. What, you know, maybe there's something that you have that you don't think you need anymore. I don't know. So, I'm going to take notes.
Running water, yeah.
Okay, that goes on the list.
And a working bathroom.
Their bathroom.
Okay. What's that?
Space.
I forgot to do this slide. What functions, activities, furnishings, and collections are needed in your town library? And what spaces are needed to accommodate these things? Okay, so that is basically the end.
Okay. What besides an actual bathroom?
Kitchenette.
Kitchenette. Okay.
A meeting room.
Wired-in technology.
A place for teens to gather.
A place where kids can have
I'm going to start repeating so people can hear. So far, we have running water, a working bathroom, a kitchenette. I missed one when I was writing. Wired tap.
Teen room, she says.
Yeah, the teen room I got. But
A meeting room.
meeting room, that's important.
Enough space that if we get a new book, we don't have to get rid of an old book.
Enough collection space.
Audio visual for presentation.
AV in your program spaces.
A space.
So we don't have, so Mary Ann doesn't have to drag this 100-pound screen around with her, right?
More than 2 computers.
More technology. Obviously, technology is the backbone of public libraries.
Children's room.
Children's story time.
Children's program room, story times, yes.
Small study rooms that can accommodate one teacher and one student that have computer accessibility in that room and a window in that room, preferably a window to the outside and a window in the door.
Is that for tutoring? Do you have a lot of tutoring that happens in, or would like to happen in?
Well, we could if we had that type of thing.
Okay.
We do have tutoring that happens, outside. Outside. Oh, yeah, on the picnic tables. On the picnic table, yeah.
In the middle of the winter?
Yeah, and, I do test proctoring, so
Okay.
that would be nice to have to be in a.
Test proctoring? Yes, over here.
Reference shelf with fine artworks, fine art books.
Art books, a better art collection. Yes.
ADA compliance around the whole building.
Believe me, we are not going to fund a building that is not 100% accessible. Yes.
Constantly running water. In other words, a
Yeah.
constant power supply, so that the library always has power and always has water.
Okay, so I think what this is getting at is the fact that if your power goes out, your water goes out.
Yeah.
So we did mention something about the ability of the library to act as a cooling, powering, and heating center in the event of an emergency. So some kind of auxiliary power supply for outages.
Yes.
Outside space that's protected, pavilion, screens.
Outside, integrated outside, outdoor, open air, places to do outdoor programming that are safe and weather resistant.
A messy craft room.
Messy craft room. I like it. Yes, over here.
Right now, we have a senior center that immunocompromised people cannot go into. And it's in our beloved town hall. And
Is that because of air quality or?
correct. And so I'm not sure how to phrase it, except that that's what we've got right now. And the other piece of that is someone said teen room, and I'm thinking the ability to have cross-generational, either single generation or cross-generational adapted spaces.
I think that's definitely an up-and-coming trend in libraries. I think the way we would look at that is program spaces that are as flexible as possible to accommodate as many different kinds of programs as possible. Yes?
More space for people to check out books instead of one place, and also more room where people can put books that are whole room.
So I'm hearing you say adequate staff space. We'll give Mary Ann an office. It might not be a big office.
With a window that looks
With a
out.
window. Yes.
Windows that open.
Operable windows, okay? There's a debate about operable versus 100% mechanical ventilation, which is the safest, but I think in a building of that size, operable windows make a lot of sense. Yes?
Is it possible to have a room that's soundproofed so that if there is a yoga class or something going on, the rest of the library does not have to hear it?
Pay attention to sound isolation in program spaces and quiet spaces.
Yes, we need a place to exercise. Right now, it's this space, which isn't really great.
No, and if you're like me, you make noises when you exercise. There was one hand over here. No?
I was gonna say well-lighted space throughout.
Good lighting. Yeah.
A beautiful space to meet your friends and neighbors and have conversation, a beautiful, spacious space.
Yeah, those are kind of impromptu gathering spaces, and they often happen in sort of the adjacent to the entryway where you run into. And I know, I'm a small town librarian before I went to the state, and I know what happens in a public library in a small town. Yes.
Two things, small cafe. would be
Cafe.
very cool. And also sensory space for children with autism.
A sensory space for people with sensory challenges. Yes.
An ability to show, to display art and
Yes. Gallery space. Yes. Yes.
I have to say this, what I'm going to say is not going to be popular, you know, and I hear and I feel the enthusiasm of we would like this, we would like this, and we would like this, and in my mind there's kind of like ka-ching, 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 you know, the cash register is rolling up. You know, and I'm somebody in town, when the quarterly tax bill rolls around, you know, I really need to look at my finances and my cash flow. And I think I'm probably speaking for a lot of people in town. And I think it's important to go through the enthusiasm. We would like this, we would like this, we would like this. But at some point, there's going to be a test of what we really need and what we can really afford. I just need to say that.
I absolutely, and one of the techniques that I employ when I facilitate group discussions like this is called design thinking. And one of the important aspects of design thinking is at the beginning, you think big, think of everything you could possibly want. We are not going to have all of these things in the library that we end up building. It's not possible. It would be, 30,000 square feet. And that's in a town like Shutesbury, that's not reasonable. It's not realistic. So we want to get all the ideas out and see how many of those things we can accommodate in, let's say, multi-use spaces or spaces with movable walls that can expand and contract as needed. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can accommodate different functions without having separate rooms for each one of them. So I'm with you, definitely. Yes.
Services and collections for people who may not be library users in town now and may not see the need for a library, but in fact could be served very well. For example, a tool library or something like that. Because, for example, the kayak program has been wildly popular, and that doesn't necessarily appeal to readers, but the library can be many things to many people.
Thank you for mentioning that, because that's another thing that I would say with, what's kind of up and coming with libraries, and that's what are called non-traditional collections. Things like tools, things like toys, things like kitchen equipment, things like seeds. Just imagine what it could be. And all of those things, I think the library is a prime place for those things to happen. So thank you. And you also brought up an important topic, and that's that somehow we have to work on bringing the library non-users into the fold. We need to demonstrate value to the community, regardless of whether you're a library user or not. An interesting fact, however, that you may not be aware of, is that when it comes, this is proven statistically, when it comes to a vote for supporting a library, the people who The people who vote yes all the time are often not library users. And the people who vote no all the time are often the people who are in the library every single day reading the newspaper. It doesn't make sense, but it's more about what this gentleman said. It's about the money. The people who go to the library to read the newspaper can't afford more taxes. So we have to, you know, it's tricky. It's very tricky.
A copier ability.
Copy, fax, print, scan, all those things, whatever the next thing is after scanning. 3D printer, yeah, all those creation tools.
I want a mimeograph machine.
The smell of the mimeograph machine. Yes.
Archiving town documents that are online for those people that would rather read them in print. And so a huge town archive section.
A historical room. The history of Shutesbury needs
Well,
to be
more
done.
like day-to-day stuff that we need now. History is made as soon as it's printed, I get that, but I mean,
Well, can you give an example of what you're talking about?
so there's reports written, and people can look at them online, but oftentimes if you can sit and read the whole report, you might have more information. So even everything we're generating for this library, these documents, I'd like to see stored in paper in the library.
Is the Spear Library the town archive, or is it that separate? Okay. You don't have one?
Well.
Okay, I won't wade into that at all. But yes, public documents, those are important. Okay, I know it's getting late. We're tired. Any last thoughts before we close this out for today? One thing I want to make sure you understand is this is only the beginning of this conversation. I ran out of business cards. I'm so sorry. But can you type our email addresses really big and put them on the screen? I encourage anyone, if you want to communicate with me and or Andrea directly, you didn't want to say something in the open forum, but you want us to know something, call us, email us, get in touch. You know, we work for you. You pay our salary. So we want to hear from you. Mary Ann and Andrea and I are going to be working together also to be doing some other exercises, and there will be much more coming out about that. Different ways that you can give input, different ways that you can demonstrate support, and different ways that you can say what you're scared of. You know, what are you worried about for this?
And I just wanted to mention too, I know it's a pandemic still, but it is the summertime and people travel in their cars to different towns and across regions in the state. Stop into a few libraries if they're open, see what they have, look around, ask them, what do you wish you had? What works really well here? And like you were saying with the economical piece, you can see how some of these libraries achieve all those functions in spaces that are designed to work well for that. So there are examples all throughout the state. We do have a library field trip list, which we can share with Mary Ann, that she can then share with everyone, and that it's kind of fun to go around and look at them. You know, not everyone is open quite yet, all their hours, because of what we're currently in right now, but it's worthwhile to take a look around.
And the field trip list is broken down into small, medium, and large, so you can target the smaller ones. And you know, if you are, I don't know about you, but I'm a librarian, and when I'm on vacation, what do? I go to libraries. So if you're traveling around the state for whatever reason, find out which libraries are on your route and stop in. Rosemary used to say, print this list out and keep it in your car. Anything else? Again, thank you so much for coming tonight. It's a pleasure to see so many people who are interested and engaged in this project. And you know, we're Andrea and I are in it with everything we have. I mean, this is something that I have wanted to do for years, and I'm so excited about it.
Thank you.
So anyway, you all know where to find me, but library.director@shutesbury.org. And then the library trustees also have an email address, librarytrustees@shutesbury.org. If you have questions, email us and we'll answer them. Okay? Thank you so much for coming out. It was really great to see all of you.